Hey guys, Kyle here from Backcountry Adventure Motorsports, and if you're looking at my bike and thinking it's naked, it is. I've got all the Touratech crash bars off there because, to be honest, they just have not lasted. I've bent them, they've moved, and I have not been happy with them. So if you look on the ground there, I've got an AltRider skid plate, I've got some lower crash bars and the upper crash bars, and I'm going to be doing an install on all three of these today. I'm going to start with the skid plate and then move on to lower crash bars and then to the upper crash bars. So if at any time you've already had one of these or you don't have interest in seeing an install on one, you can just scrub through the video and watch it from there. And man, I appreciate you guys checking this out, and hopefully this video will help you out. We're going to go ahead and get started. Call them prep steps you need to do before you get into the skid plate. First, remove your factory skid plate. It's the two bolts up front, the one bolt here, and then also remove these two bolts that are holding this bracket on. On the other side, there are some bolts up under here that you are going to remove as well. And lastly, as far as prep goes, there's a rubber grommet on your factory skid plate that slides onto a little peg. You're going to remove that rubber grommet from your factory skid plate, and you're going to install it in this rear hole right here. That is going to slide back over, and then this is going to bolt directly to the frame. Unlike the Touratech skid plate and the factory skid plate, these bolt directly to the frame instead of being sandwiched on there. So it's a lot stronger setup. So we're going to go ahead and install this bottom bracket on here using the given hardware. The bracket for the skid plate comes, the kit comes with 4 of these rubber strips, and 2 of them go onto the bracket. They're just 3M rubber strips, basically. And what they're going to do is keep any vibration, noise from happening. Just like that. So this bracket, we've already removed the 2 factory M8 bolts, okay? This bracket is going to go on over that bracket, and if you're not using the lower crash bars and you're just using the skid plate, then you would put in the factory bolts and you're pretty much done with that. Since we're going to be installing the lower crash bars, we're going to use the provided hardware, and we'll actually be removing these after the skid plate is installed, but for just purposes of making this a little bit more streamlined, we'll put these bolts in right now. Alright, just to kind of recap this bottom bracket here. Again, remove these 2 factory bolts. If you're not using the lower crash bars, you will put the factory bolts back in. I'm going to be using the lower crash bars, so I'm going to put these replacement bolts in so I can put the bracket on after I do the skid plate. Another key point is, remember that this tab here has to be slid over that, and then this bolt, if you're not using the lower crash bars and just the skid plate, you'll just remove the factory nut off this bolt, put this on, and then put the nut back on. If you're going to be using the lower crash bars, this bolt and nut are going to be replaced, and with a longer bolt, and the exhaust has to be loosened to do that, and we'll get to that when we do the lower crash bar. But for now, just for doing the skid plate, put the factory nut and bolt back in through that hole and torque everything down to spec. Other than that, we're just going to get to bolting the skid plate to the factory holes here. These are going to come out, and then we'll bolt the back to bolt the rear of the skid plate to the bracket and be done with it. Alright, before we install the skid plate, just like on the bracket, they provide these 3M rubber strips that they want installed in that location there, and again, that's just to keep any kind of resonation or any vibrating up against the frame. So got those on, and now we'll just bolt the skid plate up to the bracket into the frame. Alright, now we're just going to hold the skid plate in place and going to install the 8mm provided bolts and washer. And then in the rear, down below here, there's 4 of these flush mount bolts. Make sure, I didn't do it right now because again I'm about to pull this off to do the lower install, but make sure you put a drop or 2 of Loctite on all of these, on all this hardware before you install it. Alright, so got it all mounted up. Fits in nice without having to remove any of the previous stuff that I already had. These might vibrate a little bit. I'll have to see how that goes with having the AltRider exhaust guards on. But got these bolts all tight and the 4 bolts on the bottom. Fits in nice with this guard here. I've really bent the crap out of this one, so it's nice that it kind of holds it in tight there. And it looks like it's gonna fit. It fits real nice, and it looks like it's going to really protect everything. It comes up so much higher than what the factory one did. Well, that is the skid plate install, and I'll be moving on to the lower crash bar install. So if you would like to see that, keep watching and we'll keep going. Alright, so lower crash bars. First things first, we're going to remove the skid plate with the 4 bolts on the bottom and then the 2 front bolts. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to loosen the header bolts, which are here and here, and then again on the other side, there and there. Loosen those bolts up, and we're going to loosen this hanger, or to remove this hanger here, and use some zip tie or some wire to be able to let that drop down. And the reason that we're doing that is because the lower mounting bolt has to come out, and it cannot come out without removing the exhaust and pulling it away from the frame. So I'll get you a better shot of that whenever the skid plate is removed and we lower that or loosen that exhaust up. These 2 bolts here need to be removed, and the only way to remove them is to remove or lower the exhaust so they can come out. That being said, be careful because your oxygen sensor wire is right here, and it's pretty tight when you lower it down, so don't put enough pressure on that you pull the oxygen sensor wires out. Alright, so here's what I've done. I removed the 2 factory bolts that were there. Now, per the instructions, the bolt that was in the rear gets moved to the front since it's longer, and they provide an additional longer bolt that goes in the rear. And then you just put the factory nuts back on. Now, one thing, I did end up having to remove the little tang that held the wire for the oxygen sensor, because I did have to drop it down a hair more to be able to get this out. So just make sure you put that back in when you're done, and you might have to drop yours a little lower as well. So now I'm going to move on to the front bracket. Alright, so for the front bracket, I removed this bolt and this bolt. The nuts were on this side. I removed the nuts and I removed the bolts. The kit, if you're using the upper bars, comes with a bracket that will mount on here, and then you'll have access to be able to bolt both sets of bars on. So I'll go ahead and put those brackets on now. Let me show you the other side. There's another look on this side. Okay, so what I've done is I removed those two bolts, like I said, and I have got the brackets in there, and they're in there loosely right now. So in the top hole, I have the hex head bolt that was provided. It goes to the top hole, and then in the bottom hole is this Allen head bolt that goes in. On the other side, there is a welded nut on the back side of this other bracket. Now make sure you put some Loctite on that bolt before threading it through, just to make sure it stays tight. And then on this other part here goes your nut and your washer. Now, I'm not going to tighten those up tight yet until I get the this side crash bar on, or actually both crash bars on, just to make sure that there's no alignment issues, and then I'll go through and torque everything down. So I'll go ahead and put this this right side on, and then the left side, and we'll show you how it looks. Alright, so I got this bar on here. So on this lower bracket, I went ahead and removed the brake pedal just to give myself some more room. I think you're going to have to do that just to make it easier on yourself. These are the provided bolts that came with it. Make sure that you Loctite these, because again, the bike goes through a lot of vibration. They could come loose. Same thing on the front. Two bolts there, Loctite, get them in. I did have a little bit of alignment issue. That's why I kept that loose. It helped out a lot. Got to move the bracket around and got this side done. So we're gonna put the other side on now. All right, so the left side, if you were using the factory skid plate, you would remove these two factory bolts. You're also going to remove this bolt here that holds the skid plate on. And what we're going to do is there's provided bolts here, and this lower bar is going to go on over the skid plate bracket, and this is the AltRider skid plate bracket, and we'll put those bolts in. And you have your other two bolts up here that'll go in. So I'll go ahead and put this left side on. Alright, so I got the left side on, and again, just using those bolts through the skid plate bracket to the frame, and then these two bolts here, again, remember to Loctite everything. And from here, you can either, if you're not using the upper bars, just make sure and tighten up the bracket bolts there. Get them all torqued down, and also don't forget to go ahead and tighten up all of your exhaust bolts on the other side. Hope this helps you for the lower crash bars. They are massive compared to the ones I had on before. So for the upper crash bars, we'll be moving on to that. It uses the same brackets. All we do is basically just remove the upper bolts and put the upper bars on, and along with the bracket up front. So we'll move on to that. Thanks for watching this portion of the video. So yours won't look exactly like mine here on this upper crash bar. I've got the headlight guard on, and then I also have some Denali D4 lights. If you look at that upper hole there on the middle, the neck of the bike here, that upper hole will not be used. I removed it to remove the Touratech crash bars. This lower hole though, that is the one that is going to be used. It's right in the middle of your screen. So we remove that factory bolt, and then the two bolts that go underneath here, and we are going to install this bracket right here using the provided hardware. Okay, so I got this bracket on here. So got the provided bolts with the nuts on the back side. Can't really see it with this view. And then I also got the bolt there in that bottom hole like we just saw a little bit ago. Those are all tight and ready to put the actual bars. I'm going to marry them here, and then already loosened up this. We're going to remove these bolts and we'll put this side on. Alright, so I got the uppers on. And basically, like I said, take these bottom bolts out. This bracket sandwiches between the bracket that mounts the frame and the bracket for the lower bars. So everything is solid to the frame. There's no way that that is gonna come loose, and that bracket itself is really thick. You can look at it and it's beefy. So follow up here. You hear the thunder in the background. It's getting ready to rain on me. There are these 4 bolts. This tube slides inside of this one, and then you Loctite these bolts here. It's threaded underneath, so they just screw directly to this bracket. And on the other side, again coming around, same thing. This upper bar goes in between the lower bar and the frame bracket and completes the system. Now I'm just gonna put the skid plate on and go around and just make sure everything is tight from the skid plate, lower crash bars, and the uppers. And that's it. And that's the new AltRider crash bar system that has replaced my Touratech system. There is a lot more room in between here than the other ones that I had. You can see again where it was riding, where the bars were riding on my fairings whenever it would get bent in. And I think I'm gonna be a lot happier with them. Just a lot more room between the two there. So again, I'm gonna get that skid plate on, and I'll get some better pictures here for the end of the video.